Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar on the death of the data center, resurrection in AVS. We'll just wait a minute or so for a few more people to join and then we'll get started. All right, I'll pass it over to you, Danny.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. So good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you're not too cold this morning. I know I've been quite chilly this morning, so I've had the heating on, which is unusual. Thanks for joining us. We are about to go into our webinar around death of the data center resurrection in Microsoft AVS, which is quite a controversial topic. Or title, should I say, but the topic isn't as controversial as that sounds. You're going to hear from myself, Amit Rana from Microsoft, and Mark Wiltshire from Kier. I'm going to do quick intros first. I'd like to start with Amit, if you don't mind introducing yourself, please.
Sure. Yeah, afternoon, everybody. Amit Rana. I work for Microsoft in our global black belt organization, looking after advanced migrations and look after Azure VMware Solution as a product as well.
Thanks very much, Amit. And Mark.
Hi everyone. My name is Mark Wiltshire. I'm IT Director at Kier Group, and I have responsibilities for service delivery and technical architecture. And with regards to this session here, I've been looking after data center transformations over the last 22 years and been with Kier 8 of those last years.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Mark. So I'm going to go into the slide deck now so that we've got some context as we talk. But first of all, what I'd like to do really is just give you a flavour of what's been going on and why we're running this presentation. So as you say, you've spoken to the panel. We are who we are. You're going to hear from Amit from Microsoft in the AVS team, a global black belt in the team, which is a fantastic title. Then you'll hear from me, I'm afraid, on some slides that talks around what we see as the death of the data center, but also giving you some business impact and business context around what our customers are talking to us about and why we see the Microsoft AVS solution as a real game changer when we talk about moving to public cloud. We're then going to go into a Q&A, myself and Mark, and we're going to talk around the project that Claranet and Kier have worked on over the last year, moving them into the Microsoft AVS solution, but also other things that Mark is going to talk about. So it's quite an informal webinar, but I'd really like anyone who's here registered, if you're an attendee, please ask questions in the chat. Lizzie is in the background keeping an eye on them. And if you don't want to come on screen, or at least if you don't want to speak, that's not a problem. Please pop your questions in the chat and Lizzie will stop me or Mark or Amit talking and we'll give you some answers. So we're going to go into the, as you say, sorry, that's us in picture form. So why are we talking about it? Gartner predicted actually 2 years ago, that 80% of enterprises will shut down their traditional data centers. In fact, 10% of organizations already have, and that was 2 years ago. We're seeing a massive influx of people talking to us around getting out of delivery of services, business services, from the traditional data center platform. There are several reasons why they're doing this. Most of the reasons originally were cost efficiencies. Can we save money? Is it cheaper to go to cloud? And these are things that we have conversations with our customers quite regularly. But for me, I think the number one reason people are now looking at public cloud, but also especially at the AVS solution, is complexity. It's really difficult to lift up a traditional data center that's potentially organically grown over 5 or 6 years, that maybe didn't get the care and attention it needed, and lift that into a public cloud environment, especially when you're talking about Azure native platforms. It's difficult. Sometimes those applications are not supported, those operating systems won't be compliant, and also your team, they might not be ready for it. And this is where Microsoft, the AVS solution, really, really helps. And I'm not going to steal any more of Amit's thunder. I'm going to hand over to Amit now. I'll be driving the slides, and Amit's going to take you through some details around the AVS solution, but also what's next. So over to you, Amit.
Perfect. Thanks, Danny. I guess, yeah, before we go into the solution itself, it's probably worth mentioning that AVS is a Microsoft first-party solution. So what I mean by that is it's been built by us, it's sold on Microsoft paper, whether you have an EA or whether you're going through a CSP through Claranet, it's end-to-end Microsoft. However, we have a strategic relationship with the folks over at VMware. They have both sales and technical teams that we work with. So when we're looking at doing large data center migrations and you've got a large VMware estate, VMware are always happy and willing to come and support these conversations. So even though it's a Microsoft product, we work strategically with the folks over at VMware. If we go to the next slide, we can start with a high-level overview of the solution itself. And in fact, what I'll start with is, as Danny kind of pointed out, you know, for us, Microsoft as an organization, you know, we still think you get the best bang for your buck, say, from our SaaS PaaS services. However, when we've engaged with organizations where you have a hard and fast date to move from a data center, or there are compelling events I'll go over in a minute, it's difficult to get to native, right? To build net new applications where you've got these complicated estates. And this is where we think AVS kind of fits that gap. Now, on the diagram, on the left-hand side, you see your on-prem data center. Whether that's you're just running vSphere or you run the full cloud foundation stack, makes you eligible to run AVS. AVS here in the middle of the diagram is a managed service, so a PaaS service from a Microsoft where we provide you with bare metal dedicated hardware, right? So there's no multi-tenancy on this environment. On that bare metal, we run the cloud foundation stack. Not only do we run that stack, we include all the licensing, right? So we'll talk about commercials a little bit later on, but this is hardware licensing wrapped around a managed service. And what I mean by that is we stand you up a production ready cluster. We will manage it, so we keep the environment evergreen for that VMware stack, monitor the environment. If anything fails, you know, hardware fails and so on, we'll go in, replace that node, right? So we take away the day-to-day keeping the lights on for your hardware and that VMware software stack, right? So we do all of that for you. Then when we get to the next layer, so when we get to your guest VM, this is where AVS really kind of differentiates to our native IaaS service, right? So we in our native IaaS service, there are t-shirt sizes, for example, right? A default v4 VM, you've got to stick to that particular framework. With AVS, you can run VMs like you do on-prem, right? Whether they are regardless of size, you can run them as they are today. However, where these VMs really kind of differentiate is we allow you to run whatever you do on-prem today, right? So legacy OSs, say for example, Windows 2000, 2003, 2012, Linux 4.5, whatever you're running today, you're able to run in AVS as you are. So really kind of differentiates from IaaS. But not only are you able to run those VMs as you are today, we're able to allow you to keep your IP addresses and MAC addresses, right? So VMware have a tool, HCX. This appliance allows you to stretch your IP range from on-prem into Azure, and then just like you would do a vMotion from on-prem today, from one host to another or from one data center to another, you're able to do that into AVS, right? So once you've got your IP range stretched, you can do that vMotion. And depending on your appetite to move, we have customers that move, say, 10, 20 VMs per week, and we've had customers that have moved 500 in an afternoon, right? So this really is your fastest path into the cloud. And then on the last part of the diagram, if we move to the next slide, I'll cover off the overall picture. So we've got AVS, which sits in the same data centers as all of our other services. Now, AVS is only one part of the equation, right? So we have organizations that want to move from on-prem into the cloud, running VMware services, and we have customers that will, I guess, ultimately live and run on that VMware platform. However, the vast majority of our customers actually have a desire to modernize, right, and run in Azure native. And I think this is where AVS differs from any other VMware environment out there, is the fact that because it's a first-party offering and we've designed it to integrate with all of our IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS services, you see in this slide that integration. So once you've moved your VMs into AVS, we're able to put on that same security profile. So if you use things like Defender today, if you use log analytics to run, to have a posture around what you're doing, you're able to do that with not only your native VMs, but also now your AVS VMs, right? So it really integrates with whatever policies you might have in place, whether you're using RBAC and so on. So really kind of integrates on that side. And then I'll talk about one of our biggest use cases outside of you having data centers that need to be closed. Say, for example, a lease is coming to an end, or a building needs to be knocked down, and there are many of those that we come across. There is also Windows Server and SQL end of life use cases, right? So 2008 now is end of life, and 2012 is approaching. We provide extended security updates free of charge. I'll go into a bit more detail on that later on, but those are free of charge. So when you move in your server and SQL workloads into AVS, we effectively give you a band-aid, right? So in fact, with 2008, it's only available in Azure now. So we continue to give you security updates, but only for a set amount of time. So what we then start to see customers do is consider, again, doing the R process. If the app isn't going to give them any additional ROI, then we see organizations not modernizing the whole piece, but moving SQL onto a managed PaaS and running the rest of that environment in AVS, or we see a complete modernization. So I guess really to summarize, right, is you get the ability of running your environment as you do today, moving it quickly, but you're able to go, right, do I want to modernize that whole application and move it into native? Hey, if there's a cost advantage, yes, then that's done. If not, then you can integrate with parts of native and continue running on that VMware environment. So really opens up a world of tools, functions and features for you. If we want to move to the next slide. So I'll talk a little bit now about getting a AVS cluster up and running, especially in today's climate. When you look at on-prem data centers, we're hearing lead times of 12, 18 months to get hardware. In fact, we've seen the same, right? So hardware vendors just, today, acquiring that hardware takes so long. It used to be about 6 months, right, from acquiring hardware, racking, stacking. It's now just extended. When you look at that compared to us getting an AVS cluster up and running, we're talking about 3 to 4 hours for your initial cluster to spin up. You can do that through the Azure portal, you can do it through the CLI, you can do it through Terraform, right? Whatever experience that you have, but it's a really simple process. There is a minimum of 3 nodes to get you up and running, but once you are up and running, you're able to consume AVS as VMware cloud, VMware in the cloud, right? So you can scale up and scale down. So rather than traditionally when you'd have to go, right, we're going to acquire hardware, what's our plan for the next 5 years, what's our workloads that we're going to have in the next 5 years, what's our spike events, and you put a plan for all of that. Now you can just spin up an additional node or a number of nodes, and once that scale event is gone, you can scale back down again. And it takes us about 15-20 minutes to get those additional nodes when you want to add them. So really does bring that VMware environment into a cloud world. If we want to go to the next slide. So hopefully this screen will be familiar with many of you on this call, right? So it's vCenter. Once we've gone in and created that AVS cluster, you get access to vCenter. So just like you have on-prem, exactly the same control plane, right? You can go in here, you can create VMs, kill them, pause them, whatever you might want to do on your day-to-day business. So The biggest point here is we give you that operational consistency, right? So if you have large VMware skilled folks in-house that are used to using this, you're able to continue operating in that same way. Not only are you able to operate with the same tools like vCenter, we also allow you to integrate with whatever else you're using today. So if you're using vRealize or whatever control plane you might be using on-prem that integrates with your vCenter, you're able to do so. In fact, you get the best of both worlds, right? So you have all the VMware tools, and then you have all the Microsoft tools. So for example, if you put Arc in front of this, you can have a single control plane, not only for Azure, for all the other cloud providers out there, AVS, and your on-prem environment, right? Where you can then start to link in all your security profiles. You're able to deploy managed SQL and so on. So depends on where you're coming from, but you have the best of both worlds. Okay, and then just to touch a little bit on support, right? We get lots of questions because it's a VMware environment. AVS is supported end-to-end by Microsoft. We follow whatever support contracts you have in place in terms of SLAs, but we look after that ticket end-to-end, regardless of if that challenge is on the hypervisor or within that VMware stack. We do have a direct line into VMware support if we need an escalation. However, for you as a customer, it's a seamless process where you create a Microsoft ticket. There is no need to then go out and reach out to VMware for any support related challenges. Okay, and now hopefully onto some of the more interesting stuff around what we're running in terms of hardware and software. I'm guessing for the vast majority of the folks on this call will be UK based. In the UK, we have the AV36 SKU today, and we also have the AV52 SKU. Later on, we will be introducing a refreshed version, which is the AV36 in the middle. You see now the software stack on the bottom hand side. We were previously running 6.7. At some stage, we will upgrade to the latest and greatest. There will always be a lag from what VMware launched to what we're actually running in AVS, because there's a whole bunch of testing that we will do before we roll this out. As I mentioned at the top of the call, it's a managed service, so we will upgrade all of this. We will keep it evergreen. We through the Azure portal make an announcement of when a upgrade will be deployed. If for whatever reason there's a reason that you need to pause that upgrade, we're able to work with you on that. But essentially, this is a managed service. One of the things that I will say when you're looking at this particular slide is, don't compare AVS nodes with the host that you run on-prem. It goes back to the fact that, hey, we're running VMware in the cloud now. So typically the way to size this is looking at actually what you're using today, right? So say, for example, with your RV tools output, taking a snapshot of your used resources rather than allocated, because what you don't want to do is go, oh, right, I'm running, X number of hosts on-prem, and this is what I'll need to do. You're able to utilize these machines, far hotter than what you would do on-prem, because of the fact that, hey, you can just spin up a machine as and when you need to add an additional node. So that's the way to start looking at sizing, is what are your used resources on-prem today.
I think that's really important, Amit. It's certainly something that we've seen from customers, is that they look at what they've allocated as opposed to what's actually being utilized, and they end up with much larger clusters than they actually require. Can you just touch on the bottom right there, the minimum and maximum nodes for each of these? I think that's quite important to call out. We've had customers speak to us about, I only need a couple of nodes because it's dev and test, and I just want to try it out. And if you could just go through that again with the guys for us.
Yeah, and we do hear that a lot from customers as well, right? Where they're okay with a single node, they don't necessarily need high availability. Unfortunately, the way that we work with VMware and we've designed this platform is we need a minimum of 3 nodes, right? So that is your entry point. I think the way to look at this is a minimum, probably 100 VMs. That's really high level, but you need about 100 VMs in order for this platform to become cost effective for you. Anything less than that, I would say, just look directly at native IaaS or PaaS. If you've got 100 or more, that's when AVS starts to make sense as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant.
So I did touch on this earlier when I was giving an example, but what I really wanted to share was this is one of the biggest use cases, right? And the reason being is extended security updates, depending on the size of your organization and the size of your server and SQL estate, can go in, from the thousands into the multi-millions, right? And in fact, with 2008, we are no longer providing extended security updates on-prem, right? So depending on what kind of business you are, if you need to be compliant and there's regulations you need to follow, the only way to get those security updates now is in Azure. And then again with SQL and Server 2012, again, those are going in that same direction, where you can pay a premium to get those updates on-prem. However, that premium increases year after year, right, for the next 3 years, completely free of charge within Azure. As I mentioned, right, however, you are only just getting a lift and shift. We aren't doing anything. This is why what this does is buys you time. It's cost avoidance, and it buys you time. It's a big use case. It's a big reason why organizations do this is to buy that time. But you then also still need to have a plan of what am I going to do with 2008 next year, or with 2012 over the next 3 years. How are we going to modernize? So you're buying yourself time effectively. Next slide.
Right.
Now, placement policies is quite well linked actually to the last slide itself. We'll talk a little bit around licensing and how we license an AVS cluster for server and SQL. There's two ways to license actually. So the first one is you can just license an individual VM like you would do in Azure Native. Now the good thing is, because hey, this is dedicated tin, we're able to license at the underlying cluster. So you can really make use of your existing investments with your server and SQL licensing. You can bring those into AVS. You can license at the underlying cluster and do what we call unlimited virtualization, right? So you need to license for the cores on the number of nodes that you have. So if you've got the entry level, 3 times 36, you license that underlying cluster. You can run as many server VMs as you like. You can do the same for SQL. However, when you get a larger number of clusters, having to license that full cluster for SQL can be very expensive. So what we've got here is placement policies where we will allow you to pin your SQL machines to a smaller portion of that cluster, whether it be 2, 3, 4 hosts out of say 10 or 20. And it makes it a really cost-effective way to run your SQL workloads, right? You no longer have to consider licensing that whole cluster because of this placement policies feature that we've introduced, and it's only available again in Azure. And then one of the things that I wanted to touch on was commercials as well, slightly different to native IaaS, and there's a whole bunch of savings that we can put together, right? So AVS you can consume in 2 ways, either on a pay-go basis, an hourly basis if you want to, or you can consume through a reserved instance, right? A 3-year reserved instance is about a 53% discount from a pay-as-you-go cost. The reason why I think this is so important is you don't get the same advantages with AVS as you do with native VMs, right? You can't shut them down overnight. It's just not an environment that's built like that. So an RI really is kind of the most cost-effective way to run this environment. However, we're very mindful that a lot of organizations that move into AVS are doing this as a, say, for example, a stepping stone. Yes, we will have some customers that will live and run in AVS forever. However, a large majority have a desire to modernize. So even though we're giving you that discounted rate with a 3-year RI, we still allow that flexibility where you can exchange that RI into native, right? So if you do start to modernize, 5 months, 12 months down the line, you're not wedded to that service for 3 years. So if you went from 10 nodes down to 6, you can move that fund over into native Azure. So you still have that flexibility, but you have the benefit. And then the other thing worth mentioning here is AHub, the Azure Hybrid benefit, right? So we allow you to dual run your licenses while you're doing your migration. So you don't need to worry about, how do I dual license for this? We allow you to run those licenses for a limited amount of time, again saving you cost as well. So happy to go into a lot more detail on a customer by customer basis, but our eyes, AHub really kind of gets you the best bang for your buck. Okay, and Azure NetApp file. So this was announced GA a couple of weeks ago, and it's been something that our customers have been asking for quite some time. So AVS itself is hyper-converged infrastructure, right? So it includes all your RAM, storage, memory within those nodes. And previously, regardless of what we were sizing, you would have to add additional nodes, right? So we based we do the sizing, as I mentioned earlier, things like RV tools, and we will look at, are you a storage bound customer or CPU and RAM? Now, if you're storage bound, what we're able to do is actually size either based on CPU or RAM in terms of your number of nodes, and then you can attach ANF as a data store to your cluster. So no longer are you having to buy additional nodes just for storage, which can become quite costly. Now what we're able to do is size your nodes on those other two factors and then attach ANF, allowing the solution to become a lot more cost effective than it might have been previously based on having to grow per node. And then stretch clusters. This is another function that we've had a lot of requests for over the last couple of years now. What I'll explain before we go into stretch clusters, for those of you who don't know how an Azure region works, is within the Azure region we have multiple AZs. So if you think of an AZ as data centers, so we typically have 3 AZs in a region. Now, a default deployment for AVS is in a single AZ. In a single AZ, we will stand you up, say, for example, a 3-node cluster. It still has all the redundancy from a single data center built into it, from power, cooling, and everything, but even down to the actual cluster itself. If a host fails, we'll go in, we'll replace that host and keep you up and running. However, that comes with 3 nines. If you're an organization that needs 4 nines, this is where then stretch cluster comes into play, right? So rather than just being in a single AZ or a single data center, for you who are not familiar with that term, using stretch clusters gets you into multiple data centers, right? So you have effectively the same number of nodes in a second AZ. Should a single AZ go down, you're still able to continue running, right? So this is high availability. This isn't DR, but this is high availability, offering you an additional 9. When we talk about DR, if we go to the next slide, so then as I mentioned, that's a HA function. When we start to talk about DR, and this comes down to what you're doing as an organization today, right? So many organizations don't do DR, some have stretch clusters, and they run these things very differently. But if we're talking about a full DR, right, if we were to lose a total region, in the UK, we have UK South, and then we have UK West as a DR location. And again, around the globe, all of our regions have mirrored sites as well, where you would DR to. One of the ways to run a DR is through using VMware's Site Recovery Manager, right? So we would stand up another AVS cluster in a second region where you'd replicate your data over to. When you need to invoke DR, site B or UK West in this case would then become your primary while you're running in DR. However, this again can be a costly way to do things, because you've got to run 2 AVS clusters in 2 different regions. Or in fact, you can even use SRM. Say, for example, if you've made investments on-prem already and you want to make the most of those investments, we've seen customers run AVS as a primary and run on-prem as a DR site. However, what I'm going to talk about now, if we go to the next slide, is a more cost-effective way to do DR. So Danny, if we go over to the next slide. So another partner that we work with is Jetstream. So just like the SRM solution from VMware, they're able to replicate your data into another region. However, the biggest differentiator from Jetstream, and now this comes down to what your RTO, RPO is, but what we're able to do with Jetstream is, rather than have another AVS cluster running in UK West, we're able to replicate your data to blob, right? So depending on your RTO or RPO, you don't need to have a secondary cluster up and running. You just create that cluster when you need to invoke DR, or you can do a bit of both with Jetstream, right? So if you did have a short RTO, RPO, you could have a pilot-like cluster and then increase as and when you need it, right? But Jetstream is a slightly more cost-effective service available through our marketplace. And yeah, in terms of global availability, we've now got 24 regions live, up and running. We are introducing additional regions as well in the coming year. But as you see, we've got a good presence globally there for you. Okay, and then I just wanted to touch on a couple of our customer references. We have many more. Obviously, we've got Mark from Kier on the call as well, but a couple of examples that I'll quickly run through. So one of them was Nottingham County Council, right? So these guys had a date that they had to get out of the data center. It was a hard date, from what I remember. That building, they needed to actually physically move from the building. They had a desire to move to Azure native, but it just wasn't possible in their timeline. But they also, outside of having this date where they needed to move, they also had a licensing challenge as well, right? So previously, before we'd introduced placement policies, for them to be able to run SQL, they just didn't have enough licenses, which is where then placement policies then became really important for them. And then the other one, Carpet-Rite, we'll quickly touch on as well. So this is one where Azure native was explored. However, there was a lack of Azure skills in-house. They are a VMware shop, right? So moving on to that AVS platform really allowed them to move and then keep that operational consistency. Not only that, Carpet-Rite have acquired business or are in the process of acquiring businesses that are VMware based, right? So when you're looking at that mergers and acquisitions portfolio, you can quickly bring in new organizations running that same VMware environment. And I will pause there and leave you guys to go to the next slide.
Fantastic, thank you, Amit. Just want to check before we move on. I'm not 100% sure if any questions have come in at the moment. I'll probably ask Lizzie just to give me a little shout if there is anything there that needs answering. So if not, we'll just move on, which is great. So moving on to, as Amit has rightly gone through the entire deck, if you like, in terms of how much AVS can bring as a benefit. Why would you look at AVS rather than Azure native? Why would you look at AVS for things like DR, etc.? So I think that was a great overview of the Microsoft AVS solution, and we've seen a lot of our customers asking questions around it and really looking at what benefits it can bring. We're going to go into a bit of a case study now. I'm going to be having a quick Q&A with Mark Wiltshire in a moment, but I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that we're talking to our customers about when it comes to AVS. The business impact of it, really, it's a stepping stone to Azure. As Amit has pointed out there, it's nice. It can be as quick as you like to get into the public cloud platform. At the time of migration, or at least the time of change, you don't actually have to worry too much around Azure skills or skills that are very cloud native dependent. So you can still utilize some of the investments that you've made in tooling. You've got obviously investment in your people, and that's one of your most important assets. If your people are VMware trained and certified and comfortable in VMware, this first step into public cloud, but utilizing that VMware solution on Azure, really gives them that ability to continue to innovate, but also to continue to learn. But again, it helps them learn by using Azure services built around that AVS environment that are fully integrated now with the AVS solution. You can migrate at pace with minimal business impact. Now, we're going to talk about the Kier case study now. But before I do, the last point here about getting out of the hardware game is one, and only one of the real benefits that we saw at the beginning of this year when we started to talk to our customers around AVS. One of the things that we're now seeing is that customers are locked into, or at least coming to the end of locked in co-location services and contracts, which, as we know, the soaring price of energy is a concern for all organizations, including data center organizations. Is there going to be a point where they will start to pass on those energy costs to their customers? Of course there will be. And obviously customers know this. So what they are also trying to do is not so much just trying to stop delivering services through traditional data center methods. Getting out of the hardware game is one of those factors, but also let's stop paying for that energy and stop lining the pockets of big, you know, the fat cats that sit in EDF and British Gas and all of those sorts of guys. And that was one thing that someone brought up with me a couple of weeks ago, is the concern around the energy and the costs of energy is really one that not only ticks the sustainability, but also helps them avoid costs and helps them save costs. So moving on to Kier specifically, when we first engaged with Kier, we discovered around 1,400 virtual machines. Whilst we were doing the discovery and analysis with Kier and the team, we realized that there were quite a lot of services that had organically grown throughout the years that they'd been within their private data center, and we started to decommission. This is the big number for me, and I think this is where you can really see some cost avoidance, is that we migrated 655 servers, virtual machines, into AVS in less than 4 months. And now that was using bulk migration, which is a slightly slower migration method than RAV, or what is in effect replicated assisted vMotion, which is literally a storage vMotion. So it could have gone faster. However, we wanted to make sure there was no business impact. So using that bulk migration gave us that comfort blanket that should there be an issue while we're migrating, we can fall back to that virtual machine. So what have we done so far with Kier? And I'll do this very quickly. It does need an enterprise landing zone. You can't just build AVS and a set of nodes into a set of subscriptions without that real landing zone quality and that pristine environment that you're going to put AVS into. Once we've migrated, we've already started to transform. So again, as Amit pointed out, the applications can stay in AVS. It's not a problem. But if you want to start moving into Azure native, you can quite quickly. We've started to really provide some visibility around costs, because Azure gives you that ability to start really looking at where your costs are and what applications are causing those costs. Again, integrated with native Azure, we've started to build data platforms around that AVS platform in Azure for Kier to leverage. And all of this, as Amit has spoken about, is delivered through infrastructure of code. And in this instance, it's Terraform. And that helps us remove the reliance on a traditional data center delivery for Kier. And we're going to move into other things as we work with Kier. But I want to get to the Q&A first of all. So Mark's on the call, and hopefully he's ready for his questions. So I'm going to go straight into a first question for you, Mark. What is the Kier Group's key digital transformation driver and vision, and how AVS plays a part in that?
Hi, Mark. Sorry, you are on mute there.
Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Can you hear me okay?
There? Yeah, I can hear you now.
We can. Absolutely, Mark. Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. So from Kier Group's, from our digital transformation drivers and vision, slightly more complicated, because Kier Group is actually 5 businesses. So we have construction, highways, infrastructure, property, utilities, and that's actually underpinned also from group services, such as IT, finance, and HR. So from a digital transformation and vision, we've got actually different businesses with different requirements for that. But at a Kier level, a vision of a lot of these business areas are working towards digital by default as a strapline. What we're looking at, though, the idea behind this is what Kier is trying to, we're looking at digitalizing Kier, which will improve how we design, manufacture, deliver and operate in the business. And this has additional benefits like providing safer, greener and better outcomes, not only for our people, but the supply chain and our customers as well. So anything we're doing digitally, we want obviously our customers to benefit off the back of that. There's a few themes within this, which I think are fairly important. I think you've already mentioned it, Danny. The people and culture. So what we're looking for the future is to have a digital competent workforce. So using the standardized digitally enabled ways of working. So we're having to not only transform the technology, but how the people use that. And we are introducing new roles into the business, which puts a focus on speed to market and those business outcomes as well. And we'll go into why the platforms kind of help that. The second side is, and this once again will be very common probably for a lot of businesses, is technology. Now, Kier is very much the way we work with our customers are very kind of project contract based. So we're looking to digitally enable projects, looking at those future technologies, smart assets, and there's a big focus on those line of business applications which help drive that business and making sure they're repeatable solutions which we can put across every project and new contracts coming along. So it's kind of really important, that scalability of how this platform works. Now, from an IT point of view, what we're expected to provide is the right, secure, scalable platforms and services so that the business can deliver their quality projects. That's obviously the objective behind it. And I think one of those final themes we see in the strategies is business intelligence. So we're working hard, Danny just mentioned it, on that scalable data platform. So we've got accurate, trusted data to allow data-driven decisions and actionable insights off the back of that. Very distributed in the old days, but now obviously being pulled together through the benefits of what these platforms can give us. And I think just overarching, we're looking at embedding digital practices, the collaboration there, and actually then promoting innovation off the back of it.
Okay, yeah. For me, and I think I've been lucky enough to work with you for nearly 2 years now, and get to know the team and get to know some of your organisational units and what they're doing in the business. And you're right, they are seeing digital now as a real strong enabler to what they're doing in all of their different focus areas in the industry. And it's really interesting to see them change their language as well from the start. And also, you and your team, the language has changed more around what you're doing in the services that you're trying to deliver and how you're delivering them. And I think the AVS point, when you first moved into it, gave you that exposure to real digital cloud. And then that helps your team, your organization and your peers really understand what it can bring. And I think that for me was a real standout of the project and the relationship as we've gone forwards. My next question, I think you've already answered. I mean, for me, I was going to ask what sort of business challenges prompted you to consider the move, and I'll be honest, you've really picked up on what the business are doing and why they're driving towards digital. But could you give me some of those sort of nuggets as to the challenges that prompted you? What was it that you thought, right, I've got to get out of my private cloud data center, I've got to get into public, although the business are driving towards digital as well? What were the things that, almost like the problems you had to solve, I suppose is where I'm coming from.
Yeah, so I think with some of this, so being a kind of a technologist at heart, when we did our original data center consolidations, we already had the roadmap that we knew we would go to a public cloud eventually. I thought I'd just give a tiny bit of background for this, because I'm sure people listening to this webinar may have come from a VMware background and looking at how can I make that jump, and I think the background for this is very much a VMware technology based. And as I said, I think there's probably a lot of people on the call who are using VMware in their data centers. I personally started the VMware journey in anger in 2006 with ESX3 and transformed data centers to virtual environments from physical, and at that time it was absolutely amazing. So you mentioned death of the data center, but it's probably an evolution, not a death. And from a Kier point of view, in 2018 we actually completed our data center consolidation. So we actually moved from 10 data centers down to 2 colos and a private cloud service. Now, it's funny, Danny and I have talked about that private cloud service quite a lot, and that the fact we're replacing it. But the private cloud service we actually used was VMware's vCloud Air service. So we were probably one of the UK's largest customers in that first adoption. And all the technologies that were used in vCloud Air is exactly what Amit has actually gone through. Same technology stack, NXX, the ability to migrate seamlessly from VMware environments. So within that 2008 migration, within the migration of those 10 data centers, we were using VMware, different versions of that, and we integrated with vCloud Air, just as it's been explained in the last slides, to seamlessly migrate to that environment. Now, we actually did go out to market at the time. We looked at Azure, AWS, and vCloud Air. The VMware technologies were not with the big cloud providers like Azure and AWS at the time. And the reason we used vCloud Air was because those challenges which have already been mentioned, to actually move to a new environment, end of life hardware, all those types of things, and getting out quickly, the VMware technology in vCloud Air enabled that, which is now obviously available in Azure. If it had been available at that time, we probably would have made different decisions. We originally, when we went to vCloud Air as an example, we moved about 1,200 servers across to the vCloud Air environment. And halfway through the migration, VMware actually sold vCloud and the data center business to OVH, which was a European major cloud provider. And they actually gave OVH probably about 6 to 12 month head start to the likes of Azure, AWS using that technology. And we use the same technology to migrate out of vCloud Air to the OVH environments. And ironically, we spent a lot of time and planning on that first iteration, and then we had probably weeks to migrate 600 workloads to the OVH environment. And it just really shows the power of the VMware products. And that's exactly what you're seeing in Azure today, the power to onboard quite quickly. And the reason we took a bit more time as an organization is because we were quite early adopters of the technology with VMware, with vCloud Air. It took a bit of time to get up and make sure it was robust enough for an enterprise environment. A lot of people in the States were using it for more non-prod environments, but that had moved obviously to that level. So when we set it up in Azure, we probably put a bit more stringent governance and testing to make sure we're not going to be in the same position as we were in the early days of setting up an environment which is not stable, given we're moving production workloads to it. And we set it up, took a bit more time, but then migrated that pretty quickly. And as Danny mentioned, you can literally do this if you desire months, but you can do it in weeks, because it just doesn't impact the business. So some of those kind of business challenges at a granular level where we've moved on to is we want to actually look at services at that granular level so we can actually see what we're running. Moving across to AVS and Azure Native, we've introduced improved disaster recovery. As mentioned previously, we're kind of struggling with some of the third-party add-ons to some of the original environments. Better security integration. If you're a Microsoft house, the integration to the security products is absolutely fantastic. So it really does give that extra level, which certainly our business is looking for, especially when we look at new contracts coming in. And we also wanted to move away to something which gave better integration with data analytics, AI, machine learning, better scalability, and hopefully ultimately some reduced costs, as most people do when you do migrations and run projects.
Yeah, agree. I think also on the cost elements, you get, as Amit has pointed out there, you can actually not so much reduce your costs, but your costs are effectively being used, which was what virtualization was all about at the beginning, wasn't it? You know, you had quite a hefty server, an x86 server that had the Windows operating system and the application on it, and you might have perhaps put 1 or 2 applications on it, but that machine was pretty much running at 20% utilization, 30%, and if it was seasonal, it might have peaked to 50. The whole point of virtualization was utilizing all of the compute to its best ability. I think now with the AVS, it's taking it to the next level where you can use what you need rather than what you might need in case, and that's where some of the costs you see being really more bang for your buck, if you like. So one question that's very Claranet related, I'm afraid, but I'd really like to know the answer. Why did you choose Claranet, and why do you continue to work with us as a trusted partner and an extension within your ecosystem of partners and your IT team themselves, where we augment you?
Yeah, so Claranet was known to us through some work we actually did with the business and GCP. Now, when we went out to market, and we did go to market for this one as well, looking at public cloud providers, Microsoft actually had Claranet appointed as one of those partners to help support and deliver some of the AHUB program benefits. And so actually Claranet worked with us to develop a business case to actually move from our private cloud to public cloud. So all the analysis there, make sure the cost and figures worked out. Now, as part of that program as well, which is obviously a good one under Microsoft side of things, is under that AHUB program, we actually designed and built out a landing zone. And that basically brought in all the enablers, I guess, with that. Now, we could have actually at the end of that process said, well, actually, we're not going to go with Microsoft and go with something else. But the fact is, collaboration, building out a landing zone ready to go really shows, not only what Claranet can do, but the Microsoft investments actually into the technology as well. From the Claranet point of view, extending from that, differentiators, the Cloud Centre of Excellence capability, depending on the maturity of your organisation, that is a benefit, and we're still working through that. But the FinOps, it's not just a tool. We've actually got people there looking at how we're actually spending our money, optimising that. And when we went out to market for public cloud, a lot of people forgot about the FinOps component. So this is kind of embedded in the Claranet service, which I think has been really beneficial. I think more importantly, it's nice to actually work with an organisation who are specialists in their area. We could work with partners who have multiple hats, different technologies and so forth, but I think being cloud specialists and also multi-cloud specialists, it gives us the ability to actually work and develop our roadmaps, and we have been doing that with Claranet. So I think also in summary with the kind of relationship side of things, yes, the migration project kind of brought us all together, but it's kind of that development of the cloud roadmaps, the collaboration there. And one of the benefits we've seen is very quick to be able to onboard resources, projects and so forth. So I've kind of joked about it, and Danny mentioned at the start, I see Claranet as an extension of my team. So whether it's an architecture or working with the operational team, we can actually bring people quickly to solve either problems, business problems within the cloud, but also how we actually run those. And different customers, we're not fully managed service with Claranet, and lots of customers are, but it shows the flexibility to actually pick the components that we need and be able to flex with agility there.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mark. I think also it's being able to, like you say, it's about partnerships. It's not just about service providers, is it? And I think we're lucky enough to work with you guys, but we can also work with your incumbent providers, Wipro. We can work with your team, the organisation as a team. So I think it's really grown organically as the project has moved on. But yeah, it's been really quite a successful project, and we've really enjoyed it. I'm just conscious of time. You've really covered off the how did the move come about. Obviously, we ran a competitive tender. What I'm really interested in, and I think the audience would be really interested in now, to sort of summarise it, is what's next on the roadmap for you, your team, and Kier. and what do you think is going to help you further achieve it?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned some of it, Danny. So we're still, the AVS was the get to public cloud for us, and we did that pretty quickly. And from a modernization transformation in the infrastructure as a service space, we're probably 60% through that. Once again, working quite quickly, hopping off the migration to the transformation. I think the big thing for us is sometimes, obviously, at a business level, they don't really understand really what you do in cloud, what the platforms are. So what we're actually enabling is being ready for what the business needs and some of those demands there. So a lot of the technical side, Amit picked up about how we're leveraging those other services, but kind of moving forward, some of the things that we have been seeing, something that's pretty big for us is the data and integration platforms. So we've delivered some smaller projects, but I think like a lot of organisations, it's probably the key to how we perform in the future and get that data insight. So that is actually developing in cloud, and it's getting kind of real legs at the moment. Also, I think once you get into cloud and get beyond some of the initial work, we're very much also now focusing on the automation within the cloud environment itself. So that's not only automation really from an operational point of view and an IT point of view, but what we've seen from the business is they're using RPA tools, robotics tools. Now we know the platforms like Azure can run those natively, and we can develop those. The problem is when you don't have a platform in place, you end up going to third parties, kind of niche engagements to actually do that. So what we're seeing now is the platform is opening up more discussions with that. We've seen it with the data analytics integration and the kind of workflows and the RPA and robotics is coming along. We've also seen off the back of it, once again, depending if you're a Microsoft wider customer with the 365 things, the things like Power Apps and Power BI are fundamentally integrating with the Azure platform, especially the Power Apps and citizen development. So we're seeing a lot of traction in that space as well. Kier, like many organisations, probably has looking at putting SaaS in first. With line of business applications, but we're also seeing actually the next iteration moving into more that DevOps. So once again, it's a maturity level and that will grow. I think finally also it's just that we're building up more security using the Azure platform, single sign-on for everything, multi-factor, also bringing in a SIEM with full integration. So you enable a platform and it just opens up opportunity. I think that's what we didn't have before, and that's outside kind of stability plans, simplification plans. That's where we're heading, and hopefully we'll have the final conversation with working with partners about let's look at innovation and how we can drive the business in a different way. And those conversations have started happening now. The technology and platforms are supporting it really.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. That's superb, and thank you to Amit for joining us as well and giving us a great overview of the Microsoft AVS solution. I've just checked into the chat just to see if there's any questions from the audience, and we don't have any questions at the moment. I think we're going to close off the webinar now, but again, thank you to my panel. It's been a really, really interesting webinar today. Loved seeing what's coming next in the Microsoft AVS platform. It's been great sort of retrospectively looking at how the project went with Kier and working with you guys. I know, as I've mentioned before, and you've mentioned maturity there, Mark, in the partnership, but also in your team. And I think Kier as an IT organisation have a hugely mature organisation moving forwards, and they'll really drive themselves into being a leader in that digital built environment. And I'm looking forward to being part of that. If anyone on the webinar at the moment in the audience wants to get in touch, the details are on the screen. You'll be sent out the presentation. This is obviously a recorded webinar, so this will go up online. Feel free to share with any of your colleagues. But for now, thank you to everyone for coming on board. Thank you to my panelists. and we'll leave it there, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you.